because there's some
Right?
ways that you can interpret this thing if you don't know, but you should know like who was doing this first, what were the records that were playing, what was the community, what's going on. And I think it sounds from your explanation, it sounds like what Eli and I experienced in Boston in terms of having some, DJs to look up to and mentorship. Someone had to believe in us and believe that we could had an interesting perspective or something to add to the tradition. And I think that's sort of always been the ground that we stand on for doing our thing with Soul Clap, and some of the body of music that really is at the core of our shared collection.
Yeah. I think this kind of spoken word, this passed down traditions from person to person, has been lost a lot in dance music. Like that's maybe, I think, part of where this conversation came from. Like after Black Lives Matter, after George Floyd was murdered and Black Lives Matter became such a big piece of conversation in dance music, and like people just kind of not acknowledging the importance of Black culture in our music, and the creators of the music and the culture being Black, is, I think, like, because the traditions are not necessarily passed down from person to person, it's forgotten. People don't know the history. Producers, DJs don't necessarily know where this music came from. And I think it's really dangerous when you lose that connection, and when you lose the personal stories that are what allow you to understand those connections.
Exactly. And I mean, to touch on both of those things, in terms of the personal stories, definitely, which is why we were speaking about the RA exchanges I've been doing. And that's like, in a sense, storytelling, between Black artists, both from Detroit. Almost everyone I've interviewed thus far has been from Detroit. But it's like those generational conversations being passed down, which I think is really important because, like you said, things could get lost in the sauce. And we've already seen what's happened with dance music. I always like to bring up that article that was like how David Guetta, brought house music to America like a few years ago. And it was just like, oh my God, like, no, like this is very problematic. And one of the reasons why I started Underground in Black is because I felt like those Black roots were getting forgotten in a sense. And people weren't talking about it. I'm seeing a lot of these conversations more now, which is great. And I started Underground in Black in 2017. So that was only 3 years ago. But these discussions were not happening as much. And that was kind of what inspired me, because I'm like, wait, I have friends that I tell like, oh yeah, I DJ house and techno music. And they're like, oh, that's that white shit. And I'm just like, whoa, like, no, you're so uneducated. Let me tell you, just sit down and let's talk a little bit. So yeah, that's kind of just what inspired this whole movement, and the whole Black Lives Matter and George Floyd, all of that has kind of brought these conversations like to the fore once again. And although they can be really uncomfortable at times, but I think it's important. I think a lot of people have been exposing themselves, which is great too, because it's just like, if people feel that way, sometimes I think it's better that we do know. And the opinions that a lot of people have, it's surprising, but it also, in a sense, it's not surprising to me. So I don't know, to wrap all that up, I feel like the scene is kind of being dismantled in a lot of ways in regards to, to race, racism.
House music in general, or in Atlanta specifically?
No, I'm speaking on the scene in general. I'm not, I don't want to say I'm big on Twitter, but I have a presence on Twitter, and there's this, techno Twitter, and there's a lot of people involved, and there's a lot of conversations happening, and there's a lot of people being called out and being held accountable, which I think is very necessary. And I think that this is the perfect time to do it, because no one is quote unquote too busy. No one's touring. Everybody's at home. So I think that this is a time for a lot of people to look in the mirror, to look at their institutions, look at the history or their track record of things that they've done wrong. First, being accountable and being willing to be accountable. You know what I mean? A lot of people, I feel like, they don't want to respond. People call them out, or they don't say anything, or they're being defensive. It's like, no, like sometimes you need to just truly be accountable. Everybody makes mistakes. I think it's just about what you can do moving forward. And also not just posting a black square, not just doing your little Instagram story, you know, acting like you give a fuck, and then you're back to your selfies and worried about your damn self.